Most men don't realize the power in their own absence. We've been conditioned to believe that if we just try harder, give more, chase faster, we'll finally earn her affection, that the more consistent we are in proving our worth, the more secure she'll feel. But here's the truth: what's easily available is rarely valued. When you're always there, always calling, always checking in, you're not reassuring her. You're training her to believe that your presence is a given. And anything that feels guaranteed eventually gets taken for granted. The moment you stop chasing is the moment she starts thinking, not because you're being cruel, but because silence introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty introduces value. You see, when someone's constantly available, there's no time or space to reflect on their importance. The routine dulls the edges of desire, but when a man begins to withdraw, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect, it disrupts the pattern. She starts to ask herself, why hasn't he reached out? Is something wrong? Has he lost interest? That worry, that emotional discomfort, it's the first indicator that your absence has begun to shift the balance. Now, this doesn't mean you disappear to manipulate. This isn't a trick. It's not about playing cold to spark insecurity. It's about reclaiming your time, your dignity, and your emotional energy. You're no longer handing out your attention like it's an apology. You're choosing to invest it where it's reciprocated, respected, and remembered, and in doing so, you naturally become scarce, and scarcity breeds worth. A woman can only appreciate what she has when she's given a moment without it. That's how human psychology works. What is always there is rarely noticed. What fades away, even slightly, becomes vividly present in the mind. That's why stepping back isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It gives her space to evaluate. And more importantly, it gives you the clarity to observe what she does when you stop doing everything. When you stop calling, texting, checking up. When you stop making her the center of your emotional world, two things happen. Either she realizes your presence mattered and she starts leaning in, or she drifts because she was never truly invested to begin with, and both outcomes serve you. You either reawaken her appreciation, or you remove yourself from a dynamic that never truly respected your energy. But you have to resist the urge to fill that silence. You have to sit with the discomfort of your own growth, because this path is not easy, especially if you're a man who feels deeply, who leads with heart. It'll feel unnatural to pull away. You'll question if you're doing the right thing. You'll wonder if she even notices, but that's the test. The real shift doesn't happen when you withdraw. It happens when you stay withdrawn and refuse to seek comfort in the old habits that kept you small. And if she does reach out, if the absence draws her back in, you don't immediately revert to the version of yourself who was waiting, hoping, chasing. You remain grounded, still, discerning, because now you've seen what space can do. You've understood that your value increases when you're not always within reach. You've tasted the respect that distance can command. That's not ego, it's equilibrium. Let her feel the absence. Let her wonder what changed. Let her worry, not because you want her to suffer, but because you want her to feel what you've been feeling all along. The weight of uncertainty, the ache of emotional imbalance, the sting of taking someone for granted. That's the mirror being held up, and if she sees clearly, she'll step forward, not out of panic, but from a place of recognition. You're not doing this to make her miss you. You're doing this to remember who you are when you're not always pouring into someone else. And once you remember that, once you feel the power in silence, the strength in not chasing, you'll never move the same way again, because a man who doesn't chase is a man who knows he's the prize. There's a certain kind of power that only emerges in silence. Not the silence of weakness or defeat, but the silence of intentional growth. When you choose to step back, not just from her, but from the noise, from the distractions, from the constant need to be seen, you enter a space where real transformation begins. Most men make the mistake of trying to prove they've changed before they've actually changed. They update their status, post motivational quotes, start broadcasting the hustle. But if you have to announce your elevation, it's not elevation, it's performance. And performance never holds real weight. The woman who once had your full attention now sees something she doesn't recognize, a stillness, a withdrawal, not driven by anger, but by focus, and that shift is unsettling in the best way. Because she no longer knows where you are mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You've gone quiet, not ghosting, not punishing, just focused. And when a man becomes focused, the world pays attention, even if he doesn't ask it to. You're not replying as fast anymore, not because you're playing a game, but because your time is being filled with things that build you. You're hitting the gym not to impress her, but to discipline yourself. You're reading, learning, surrounding yourself with men who hold you to higher standards, and without saying a word, you're changing the narrative she had about you. You're no longer the man who chased endlessly. You're becoming the man who doesn't need to explain where he's going, because his actions will make it clear when he arrives. And here's the part that most don't understand. Growth in silence carries more weight than any loud declaration. Because silence creates intrigue. It plants questions in the mind. What's he doing? Why has he gone quiet? Is he moving on? And those questions come not because you're trying to manipulate her emotions, but because real transformation always disrupts familiar dynamics. The man she thought she understood is evolving, and that uncertainty makes her pause. You see, when you upgrade yourself in silence, you're not doing it to win her back. You're doing it to become a man who no longer needs to. That's the shift. That's the truth most aren't willing to face, because deep down, every man has to make a choice, either continue to live in cycles of validation, seeking, or step into the discomfort of growth. And growth is uncomfortable, it's isolating, it's slow, but it is also undeniable. There's no need to flaunt the progress. The results will speak. Your presence will change, your tone, your posture, your energy. None of it will feel the same. And when she does reach out again, because absence combined with elevation creates tension, she'll be met with a version of you she didn't expect, not cold, not bitter, just clear, clear in what you accept. Clear in what you allow, clear in who you are, and that clarity, that's magnetic. It's not about making her feel like she lost something. It's about becoming someone who was never meant to be taken for granted in the first place. You're not looking for closure from her anymore. You're not waiting for a reply, an apology, or a second chance, because in silence, you've given yourself what no relationship ever could, a foundation. And from that foundation, you rebuild, not to impress, but to embody. You're no longer reacting to her behavior. You're responding to your own purpose, and whether she comes back or not becomes irrelevant. Because you're no longer trying to be chosen, you've already chosen yourself. That's the man who commands respect. That's the man who becomes irreplaceable, not because he begged to be, but because he walked away and came back unrecognizable, in the best way possible. So upgrade yourself quietly, relentlessly, not for her, not for revenge, but because the man you're becoming deserves nothing less. There's a fundamental truth every man must confront at some point in his life. If your world collapses when she leaves, then it was never your world to begin with. It was borrowed, shared, and dependent, and that's not strength. That's fragility dressed up as love. The goal isn't to live in a way that keeps her at your side out of fear or obligation. The goal is to build such a meaningful, grounded, and driven life that her presence becomes an addition, not a necessity, a complement to your purpose, not the center of it. You must build a life that doesn't need her, yet naturally attracts her. That means waking up every day with a mission that has nothing to do with whether or not she texts you back. It means anchoring your worth not in her affection, but in your daily discipline. Because when your life becomes bigger than your relationship, when your purpose outweighs your desire for connection, You step into a different tier of masculinity, one where you're no longer orbiting someone else's emotional gravity. You're grounded in your own. It's easy to confuse longing with meaning. Many men chase women because they lack direction. They try to find fulfillment in affection rather than achievement, but she can feel that. She knows when she's the only thing holding your world together. And while that might sound romantic in movies, in real life, it breeds pressure and eventually disinterest, because no woman wants to feel like she's your escape from mediocrity. She wants to feel like she's part of a world that's already powerful, already complete, already moving. When you become deeply invested in your evolution, when you train your body, sharpen your mind, master your emotions, you create a gravity of your own. And that gravity pulls people in, not just her, friends, mentors, opportunities. You become a force, not a follower, and ironically, the very moment you no longer need her attention is often the moment she wants to give it most. Not because you begged for it, but because value always attracts curiosity. She starts to wonder what's changed, why you're unavailable, why you seem at peace in her absence, and it's not because you're pretending. It's because you're actually living. You're not posting photos to make her jealous. You're not out partying just to prove you've moved on. You're quietly doing the work, creating, building, learning, evolving. And that kind of self-respect can't be faked. It radiates. It makes you stand out without needing to shout. It changes the energy of every room you walk into. And if she sees it, she'll feel it before she understands it. But here's the part that matters most. You don't build just to attract her. You build because your life demands it, because you've decided to become the man your younger self needed, and your future self will thank you for. You build because you've had enough of chasing love to distract from your own lack of fulfillment. You build because you know now. True connection can only come when both people are whole, not when one is leaning on the other for identity. And that's what separates boys from men. A boy waits for her to validate his worth. A man defines it regardless of who walks in or out of his life. And when a man does that, when he truly lives with passion, clarity, and self-ownership, he no longer fears losing her. Not because he doesn't care, but because he finally understands. Love that's drawn to strength is far more enduring than love that's clung to need. You want her to respect you, then become someone who doesn't collapse in her absence. Become the man who doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't fold, not out of ego, but out of purpose, not out of coldness, but out of confidence. Because when you build a life that doesn't need her, you become the man who draws her in, not because you asked for her attention, but because you stopped needing it. And the moment you reach that place where your life speaks louder than your words ever could, you will realize the most attractive version of you was never the one trying to be chosen. It was the one who chose himself first. There's a deep distinction between shutting down and choosing who gets access to your emotional energy. Most men haven't been taught that difference. They think emotional availability means constantly being open, endlessly pouring, always showing up. But that's not strength, it's exposure, and when you expose everything, you leave nothing sacred, nothing protected, nothing respected. Emotional energy is currency, and just like financial wealth, when you give it away freely, people start treating it like it costs nothing. The truth is, a woman only starts to worry about losing you when she realizes she no longer has easy access to your inner world. When you're no longer reacting, no longer explaining, no longer trying to fix or chase or clarify, she begins to feel the shift. And that shift isn't loud, it's quiet, calm, subtle, but it's deeply unsettling because for the first time she feels distance not through silence, but through detachment, and detachment, when rooted in self-worth, is one of the most powerful forces a man can embody. You're not being cold, you're being careful, you're not withholding love, you're protecting your peace, and when a man learns to do that, everything changes. He stops bleeding for people who wouldn't offer a bandage. He stops begging for connection from those who only showed up when it was convenient. He stops explaining his value and starts living it. And when you live your value, you no longer seek validation. That alone makes you magnetic. Women are highly intuitive. She knows when you're still emotionally tethered to her, even if you've stopped talking. She can feel when you're energetically lingering in her orbit. But the moment you cut the invisible thread, the moment you no longer need her to see your pain, feel your worth, or recognize your growth, that's when she truly begins to feel the loss, because now you're not just physically gone. You're emotionally elsewhere, and that, more than anything, is what creates the worry. Men who are emotionally and energetically unavailable, not because they're broken, but because they've become selective, calm, and a different kind of attention. They don't entertain drama, they don't react to emotional bait, they don't explain themselves to people who are committed to misunderstanding them, and that clarity, that boundary, it draws people in. Not because you're trying to be mysterious, but because you've become rare. In a world of oversharers and emotional chaos, your silence becomes discipline, your composure becomes intimidating, your distance becomes attractive. You stop being predictable. She can't read you the same way anymore. You're no longer the man who sent paragraphs, who over-explained, who apologized for feeling deeply. You've evolved. Now your energy is yours. Your attention is earned, and your emotional world, that's private property. Invitation only, and when she realizes that she's no longer living rent, free in your heart, when she feels that the access she once had is now gated by purpose and maturity, she starts to reflect. She starts to wonder. She starts to worry. You don't owe her closure. You don't owe her your emotions just because she suddenly wants to feel close again. Growth doesn't come with a broadcast button. It comes with boundaries, and boundaries are what teach people how to treat you. If you continue giving your heart to someone who hasn't earned it, you teach them to expect it. But if you reclaim it, if you sit with yourself, redirect your energy inward, and stop offering your emotional depth to those who drained it, you become untouchable, and that untouchability isn't arrogance. It's awareness. You've realized that peace costs more than attention, that stillness is louder than reaction, that a calm mind and a full heart don't chase, they choose, and in that choice, in that still and sovereign stance, you become the version of yourself who doesn't just attract her again, but forces her to ask herself why she ever underestimated you in the first place. So stay unavailable, not to punish, not to prove a point, but because you finally understand that your emotional energy is not a gift to hand out recklessly. It's a mirror. And only those who are willing to reflect on their role in your life deserve to stand in its light. There's a line you cross, as a man, when you stop moving out of reaction and start moving out of purpose. It's the difference between noise and signal, between impulse and intention, and most men, when they feel the sting of loss, especially the loss of a woman they cared deeply for, fall into the trap of pettiness. They post to provoke, they speak to sting, they pretend to move on, hoping she's still watching. But here's the problem. Any energy spent trying to be seen by someone who left is energy stolen from your future. You cannot become who you're meant to be while trying to prove something to someone who didn't stay. That kind of movement, loud, performative, ego-driven, it might bring momentary satisfaction, but it never creates lasting change. And deep down, she sees through it. Women are wired to pick up on authenticity. She knows when you're moving just to get a reaction. She knows when your confidence is manufactured and your silence is staged. That doesn't make her respect you. It makes her feel power, and the more power she feels, the less urgency she has to return. But when you move with purpose, not to be noticed, but because your path demands it, you change the dynamic. Because you're no longer playing her game, you're building your own, and in doing so, you remove yourself from the emotional tug-of war that kept you stuck. You no longer need to win, you just need to grow. And growth doesn't scream at shows, Purpose is what makes your presence magnetic, not charm, not manipulation, not passive, aggressive behavior, just the quiet, consistent effort of becoming the man you were meant to be. And ironically, that's the very moment she often starts to look back. Not because you tried to get her attention, but because your absence, paired with progress, speaks louder than any post or message ever could. When you start building a life rooted in direction, the distractions fall away. You stop checking if she watched your story. You stop wondering if she's dating someone new. You stop analyzing the silence. Because you're no longer in a race with her timeline. You're on a mission with your own. And that shift, that fundamental reorientation, sends a message that no words could ever capture. You've outgrown the need for her validation. This isn't about revenge. It's not about making her feel what you felt. That's still pettiness dressed up as purpose. No, this is about transmutation, taking the pain, the confusion, the loss, and turning it into fuel. Not bitterness, not resentment, just clarity. You don't rise by hoping they regret. You rise by making regret irrelevant, because the man you're becoming would never beg to be chosen. He's already chosen himself. Every time you choose discipline over distraction, silence over reaction, focus over proving a point, you gain back a piece of yourself, and the more you build in that silence, the stronger you become. Not just for her to see it, but for you to live it, because the life you build in response to loss becomes the very foundation of your future freedom. And when that foundation is strong, it doesn't matter who walks in or out. You're grounded. There's a kind of peace that comes when you no longer care who's watching. You start dressing well because it sharpens your mind, not because she might notice. You go to the gym because your body deserves strength, not because you're trying to look better without her. You pursue your goals with urgency because your time matters, not because you're in a hurry to show you've moved on. That's what separates a man of noise from a man of substance. Let her think what she wants. Let the silence speak. You don't need to participate in emotional theatrics to prove your evolution, because the ones who truly evolve don't announce it. They live it, and in that living, they create gravity. A pull so strong, so undeniable, that anyone who once doubted them begins to feel it. Not because of what was said, but because of what was done. So move with purpose, quietly, steadily, without apology. Because in a world full of men trying to be noticed, the one who doesn't need to be seen becomes impossible to ignore. At some point, you have to let go of the outcome. You have to release the need to be understood, to be chosen, to be remembered. Because real power doesn't beg for recognition. It stands quietly in truth and lets time do the speaking. And when it comes to women, especially the one who walked away or began to drift, you have to be willing to face the reality that her return is not your responsibility. Your only job is to become so rooted in your own value that whether she reconnects with it or not becomes irrelevant. See, people often don't realize the worth of something until it's no longer within reach. Familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort breeds blindness. When you were always there, always available, always responsive, always emotionally open, she didn't have to consider what life without you looked like. She didn't have to confront the question, what if he's actually gone? And that question only arises when you stop trying to answer every doubt for her, when you stop filling in the silence, when you no longer play the role of emotional safety net, hoping she'll finally see what you've always known you were. So you step back, not to provoke, not to manipulate, but to allow space for clarity. For both of you, because space is where truth breathes. It reveals whether the connection was rooted in mutual respect, or just in your constant effort, and if it was the latter, then you walking away doesn't destroy something real. It exposes something false. In your absence, something powerful happens. She starts to feel the lack, not of your presence alone, but of your energy, your consistency, your emotional depth. she begins to reflect. And if there was genuine connection beneath the noise, beneath the pride, beneath the confusion, it'll rise. That's when she might reach out. But here's the part most men miss. When she does, it's not a signal to fold. It's not a cue to slide back into old patterns. It's a test, not of her, but of you. Are you still the man who seeks approval? Or have you become the man who stands in self-worth? Let her reconnect, but on new terms. Let her feel the shift. You don't return to who you were when she left. That man needed her validation. That man sought her attention like oxygen. But now you've breathed on your own. You've rebuilt. You've remembered who you are, and from that position you don't chase, you invite. An invitation has a different tone. It's calm, it's grounded. It says, I'm open, but not waiting. I'm willing, but not desperate. I'm here, but not for the version of you who couldn't see me. And maybe she doesn't come back. Maybe she never reaches out again. That's not a failure. That's a filter. Her silence is an answer, just like her interest would be. Either way, you win, because the man you became in the silence, in the solitude, in the quiet labor of self-respect. That man no longer defines his worth by who chooses to stay. You stop living in the emotional echo of her absence. You stop measuring progress by whether she notices, and in doing so, you elevate. You become a man who sees that loss is not the end, but the beginning of revelation, because in loss you discover your standards. You discover your strength. You discover that your value was never meant to be proven. It was meant to be lived. So let her reconnect with your value if she can see it. But if she can't, if she looks back and still doesn't recognize what she walked away from, then let her continue down that path. You don't need to convince her of anything. You don't need to reopen closed doors just to feel worthy, because worthiness doesn't knock, it walks, and you, finally, are walking in it.